Hey, I'm Alex Radcliffe from Board Game Co., and this is News and Week in Review. This is the regular weekly video where I go over different news things, upcoming games, the week in review, generally a topic of the week, all that kind of stuff. As always, timestamps in the description down below, or just timestamps somewhere on that video bar that you're watching. But first, a word from our sponsor, Gamefound, where if you head on over to Gamefound, you can find Too Many Bones Unbreakable, currently available. This thing ends today, so if you wanted in on this, you should check it out now. This is the top 50 on Board Game Geek, 1 to 4 gear locks, dice building, RPG adventure, fighting off a tyrant, multiple new baddies, both 2 and Unbreakable, as well as optional buys, all that kind of thing. And this is one that if you back it now, you'll be getting the 40 Caves and Lore expansion for free. By the time you're watching this, they crossed that $3 million stretch goal. I assume they actually haven't crossed it yet, but I assume they have by the time you're watching this, and that means you're getting a full $30 MSRP expansion for free when you back now. That's basically our little sponsor spot. Those are always, see, this is the week in review. The week in review is a bit more casual, which means sponsor spots are always interesting because I've watched more than my fair share of Skillshare sponsorships, Better Health sponsorships, whatever they are. And part of the inherent problem with them is always that aspect of how do you sound like you're not just selling something? And I don't have a good answer because I feel like when I've talked about Lords of Ragnarok or Too Many Bones in these sponsor spots, I feel like I'm selling something. Granted, they're both games I really, really, really like, but that's the nature of a sponsor spot because you are selling something. My goal with sponsor spots is just to not sell you something I don't really believe in and not to give you information that I think is false. So, for example, you will not see me saying words like, back this game at a better price if I don't believe it's a better price. That's the best I can do. The sponsor spot will always sound a bit like a sponsor spot. I'll try to keep them as short as possible in the 15 to 30 second range, hopefully not too obtrusive, but it will sound like I'm selling you something, but it also will not be something that I don't believe in. Hopefully I won't have to explain this every single time. I think this is the first time I'm doing it. It's the week in review. It's more casual. But either way, let's go ahead and jump into it and talk about news first. And there's a bunch of news, including Iello severing ties with North America. Iello, it's just Iello, that company over there. But the King of Tokyo and a whole bunch of other games, Bunny Kingdom, a ton of great games under their belt. They're severing ties with their North American distribution partner, Iello USA, basically. But I don't know what that means for the future. I imagine they're still selling games to the US. I think they're just probably doing it differently or with different people. So we don't have a lot more news yet. They may comment at a future date. They may not. But it's a big shakeup to do something like that. So we'll see what happens there. In less dramatic and also more relevant news to yourself, we have Thunderworks. Thunderworks Games is putting out a bunch of puzzles. This is something we've seen more and more in the board game space. I actually still have my Everdell puzzles that I need to do. But Thunderworks Games, they are doing puzzles for role player and cartographer. Again, we're seeing this a lot from a lot of companies. I assume people are buying them. I enjoyed my Everdell puzzles, but to me, Everdell is an exception because the art is absolutely amazing. Thunderworks Games happens to be, I don't mind having a cartographer's puzzle, but I'm like, I don't know how many of these puzzles I actually need or want. Everdell is nice enough. I will throw that thing on a wall. That thing is beautiful. Thunderworks' cartographers, I'd throw it somewhere, but more like a game room kind of situation. Then we have Kickstarter updates. King of Average actually talked about this in a full video. I'll link to that down below. But Kickstarter, effectively, and I've known about this for some time. I didn't know they did an official update, but effectively, Kickstarter has been harsher and harsher and which projects they're accepting. One of the benefits of working with a variety of creators is very often I get news from them like, oh, our Kickstarter got delayed because Kickstarter is delaying the project. They refuse to accept that project. Kickstarter is a submission process. You propose your actual project. Kickstarter either approves it or it does not, and more they are not approving it. Specifically, the terms they are going with nowadays is that unless you are an established creator, you have to have fulfilled your last game before you can put out your next game. What counts as an established creator? To be clear, that's not you can't have 2 simultaneous projects. That's been enforced for a long time. What they're doing is if you had a project and it ended in October and it's fulfilling in July, well, until it actually fulfills, you can't run another Kickstarter. Unless you're an established creator. Established creators, I believe, have 4 projects under their belt that have already successfully delivered. Basically, they're allowing that leniency of saying, hey, you've proven that you're doing this, so you're good to go. The interesting thing about that is that means that, and Kickstarter, King of Average had a great point about this, how it might lead to the rise of micro Kickstarters. It might lead to creators doing, 4 smaller projects in a year that they know they can deliver rapidly, because that allows them to spend a year getting up to speed and getting that status before moving on to, well, actually creating on a regular basis. Because the nature of being a company, If you have a passion project, a board game as a passion project, sure, you can do one project and then wait till it delivers and onwards. If you're running a company, you can't afford that kind of turnaround. Your project might take a year and a half to deliver, and you might need to do 2 projects a year to actually survive as a company. You might need to do 3 or 4 projects a year. Now, granted, the people backing your project, that's not their problem. But the people backing the project, that's their choice. Kickstarter's taking away that choice and saying, no, we just don't trust you, which I'm fine with. I'm fine with those enforcements. But again, it might lead to companies trying to do micro projects to be able to actually get up and running, as opposed to otherwise it might take them 4 or 5 years to get up and running. Alternatively, as KOA also pointed out, it might just lead to more people going to Gamefound. Kickstarter choosing now to be more enforceful about board games, which is one of the best and safest places to put your money on Kickstarter. Meaning Kickstarter is full of lots of issues that happen. The board game space happens to be one of the safer places on Kickstarter. So they're sending a whole lot of potential customers over to Gamefound, which I imagine Gamefound is using less rules and procedures and more common sense. Meaning, I believe you should be safe. I believe you should turn down certain projects. But I also believe there are clearly established companies that just they haven't actually delivered yet. And the only thing you're doing is just ruining their chance of being a company. So I believe Gamefound will likely be, because Gamefound doesn't want the reputation of being the place where scammers go. Trust me, they do not want that sponsor aside and all that. They don't want that reputation. But they may take on projects that Kickstarter said no to because of this. That was a long little segment piece. Next up, speaking of Kickstarters and whatnot, and these might be related, by the way. These actually, I didn't even think about this until right now. These might be related. Hero Realms and Hamlet both announced delays on their Kickstarters. I didn't even think of this, but it's possible that it's because of that. I have to double check. I think Mighty Boards. I think Mighty Boards has more than 4 established fulfilled Kickstarters, so they should count as established. Also, Hero Realms. So maybe not. Maybe these both are established companies. I don't know the for sure rules. Either way, I know Hero Realms and Hamlet both said that they're being delayed for right now. It's not changing the way the game will be delayed, or at least in the Hero Realms case, they said that their game timeline is the same. They're just launching the Kickstarter closer to production. For Hamlet, they're trying to get the more things put together, more art assets, different things that are still in the process. They want to show you a better finished page before it actually launches. So both those are delayed, which is a good time to lead to our last news piece, which is make sure to check out Shelf Clutter. I'll throw a link to his video down below. He had a Halloween episode that I thought was fantastic. I am biased, trust me. But Shelf Clutter in general, the reason it's relevant off that last spot is he covers the Kickstarters coming up next week. So for example, I did Kickstarters coming up next month for November, and I told you that Hamlet and Hero Realms were going to be there. Because when I told you that, they were. If you watch Shelf Clutter, you'll get the most up-to-date information because he does these every week, although granted, he also gets things wrong because even every week is not enough to keep up with the pace of changing news and information in the Kickstarter space. Which brings us to games. What new games are coming up? Some Kickstarter, some not. We have Riftforce. Riftforce is getting an expansion, which is great because I think Riftforce is, well, I like it. I like it a lot. I have a video coming up soon about we'll talk about it, but I do enjoy Riftforce from Capstone Games. Really been having fun with that lane battling sequence. In general, these kinds of different styles of games. It's not a lane battle like a MOBA, but these kinds of head-to-head card games like Hanamakoji, like Battle Line, all these things, Riftforce fits very nicely in there while being different. My biggest complaint, well, actually I have 2 complaints, but I'll talk about that later. But one of my biggest complaints is the fact that I want more cards. I want more content for the game because right now you see 8 of the 10 powers every single game. So even though they've mixed up in a variable way, I want more variability to the experience, so I'm excited for that expansion. Then we have Fantasy Realms. Fantasy Realms, which already has Fantasy Realms, and then they have Red Rising, which is not really Fantasy Realms, but is inspired by Fantasy Realms, and now we have Fantasy Realms is getting a Star Trek version, so, you know, let's throw an IP on it, and maybe you'll explore the ventures in space with Picard and who knows what, but yeah, they're getting a Star Trek version. We have big news here. Big news, we have the newest line from Garphill Games, and we had the whole Architects, we have the Paladins, we have the North Seas Raiders, all these different lines of games. They announced their newest line of games, the Wayfarers of the South Tigris, and that'll be followed by the Scholars and the Inventors of the South Tigris. That's the newest line. This one's focusing on dice placement, which has me very excited. Garphill Games is a company that their games are all amazing, and none of their series have really stuck with me. They've all been enjoyable, but none of them have stayed in my collection, but I do like dice placement, so color me very excited for this one. Maybe I'll find a Garphill Games series that works for me, that really sticks with me. We have Abyss, Game of Pearls. Abyss is a game that's been around for a while. I think it's Bunokathala. I could be wrong. But they have some sort of announcement of Game of Pearls. Sounds like a new way to get into the Abyss game. I don't know much more about it just yet. And then lastly, Holy Grail Games announced their next Kickstarter, or Gamefound, I actually don't know which one it is, called Encyclopedia. A heavy Euro game from the creators of from the creators of one of their prior games. Not Monuments. Was it Monuments? No. They have that Civ game. I reviewed it at one point. I'm blanking on the name, but they have a new game, Encyclopedia. That part I got right. Which brings us to Topic of the Week. Now, Topic of the Week was going to actually be about Gamefound, new sponsor, talking about that, but I ended up doing a dedicated video on Thursday about that instead, so you can check that out if you haven't already. It was a whole dedicated video. I had people asking, well, there wasn't actually that many people asking questions. There were different aspects and things I wanted to talk about, so I did a full video on it. I had like one person asking questions, but either way, if you want to check out more information about the whole sponsor aspect, general thoughts, my financial situation as someone who's trying to balance moving into content creation full time, if you want any of that kind of information, you can check out that video. Today's topic of the week is also financially relevant, but very different. And it's inspired by a forum post I saw, well, 5 minutes before doing this video, where I saw someone talking about how they, and this is not news, but it just inspired the topic. They were talking about how they started comparing their board game spending around movies. Like, they used to try to look at every single game and then judge whether it's worth it or not worth it. And now they're like, well, no, I'm going to compare it to a movie, and I don't mind spending $30 on a game and getting 2 plays out of it. That's basically the equivalent of me going to date night with movie, whatever, with my wife. I'll spend more than that by the time you account for childcare and babysitting and all those things. By the way, as a side point, tangent to this topic, I don't go to movie theaters anymore for exactly this reason. We have kids, which means by the time you account for food, tickets, and this is even before COVID, and then the babysitting, by the time we go to a movie, it's like $80. So what we did, pro tip, is a long time ago, we actually bought a projector for like a good quality projector for like $400, set up in our back room, got a projector screen, and now we have date night every single week. Every single week reliably without fail for the past like 3 years. My wife and I had date night, and we spend like $20 on food and then nothing on the movie. Granted, you have to be okay seeing movies like 3 months late, but we have all the subscriptions. We have Netflix, Hulu, Disney Plus, all that stuff. But movies are a lot cheaper when you watch them at home on your own personal giant screen with as much popcorn as you want and all those kinds of things. Complete side point. Either way, he's talking about comparing games to the cost of movies and then being more okay with spending money on games. And this is something that's always bothered me. Always to a degree. Not like losing sleep at night bothered me. But why movies? I've seen this comparison time and time again. The idea that people constantly look at, well, if you compare it to the price of going to a theater, blah, blah, blah. Why? Why? Shouldn't you compare the enjoyment of a thing to the lowest cost that makes sense, not the most common cost? Meaning, in other words, I can say, hey, I'm going to get that $200 Kickstarter because I could have been getting Kingdom Death Monster. And when you compare it to that, that just makes sense. And I have Kingdom Death Monster. I don't actually have Kingdom Death Monster. But if you have it, you'd be like, well, I mean, I do X, Y, and Z, which is really expensive. I could be going on a family vacation. It could cost $5,000 to go on a family vacation. So I'll just buy all these games instead. Because if you compare it to the price of fun, why are we comparing it to a thing like movies? You should compare, in my opinion, you should compare all your spending across all the board, not to some random point that makes it make sense, but rather to the point that is most comparable. So, for example, if you're buying a board game, and you could buy other board games that are cheaper, that are better suited for you, get those. Just because you could get a board game, and if you translate it out, it would be the cost of a movie, and therefore it all justifies itself. I mean, sure. Also, how much do you spend going to the movies every year? This is another thing that I always find fascinating. How much do you spend? Even if you go to the movies, let's say once a month, and granted, I'm sure there are people who go more than once a month, but even that, if you take that, and even if you take my math, with childcare, with food, with everything, that's $70 times once a month, that's 70 times 12, that is $840 a year. Do you spend that much on board games? More? Less? Like, where is the line? What do you do? And do you play board games more than you play movies? I just find it interesting that people compare it to a somewhat relevant, but perhaps not the most relevant data point. This is why, and this is also, I recognize this is not like a little odd because I talk a lot about Kickstarters where we spend a lot of money on Kickstarters. But I also do focus specifically on the fact that can you resell them? Does it make sense? I'll frequently say things like, I really love Agamonia. Also, you can get Gloomhaven Jaws of the Lion for $35, and that might give you a similar experience. I will say things like that for that point. I will not compare Agamonia to the cost of going to the movies and tell you how you will get dozens and dozens of hours of gameplay out of Agamonia, and if you compare that to the cost of the movie, it's a bargain. I mean, by the way, it is. That is absolutely true. It is a bargain compared to the cost of a movie. But it's not a bargain compared to the cost of Gloomhaven Jaws of the Lion. I don't think movies should be the standard. I think does it make sense should be the standard. And I recognize completely that sometimes we do things that don't make sense. I have a full dedicated video talking about how I backed all the Marvel United stuff and how I genuinely believe I shouldn't. I shouldn't have. And that's because sometimes we're allowed to do things that don't make sense. Sometimes we're allowed to spend money in ways that aren't the most efficient. But you should recognize it as such. We shouldn't self-justify things in ways that... We shouldn't just justify things and say, well, this makes sense. We should recognize when our logic doesn't make sense, and then we should write it off as, I'm allowed to do things that are exceptions. I'm allowed to live life with leeways. Lots of things in life don't make sense, and that's okay. But we shouldn't try to justify the math, the numbers, all of that. That's why I try to avoid this. I try to avoid this kind of stuff. I tell you when I'm doing things wrong. When I go all in on games that I know there's a decent chance that I'm not playing more than the base content. A Skyrim, currently on Kickstarter. I should not be getting more than the base game. I shouldn't. But I will, because I want it all. Now, granted, if I sell it, that's fine, because I'll get my money back. Or at least I'll get most of my money back. But if I actually just play it, if I just play the base game and leave the rest set up on my shelf, then I basically have paid for the base game, which is great, and I've also paid for glorified paperweight on the shelf behind me. But I recognize that that's not valid. I recognize that that's me allowing myself that leeway of, here's an excuse of what I'm doing. Again, I have videos talking about why I go all in on Kickstarters, and I talk about this point, about how I shouldn't necessarily do so. So yeah, that's this little topic of the week, just a little segment on, if you want to compare it to movies, compare it to movies. I think that's not the thing that makes the most sense. I think it's a good justification point. I think a purchase makes sense or it doesn't make sense mostly on its merit or on the merit of the lowest cost comparison, not a potential cost comparison. Yeah, just my 2 cents, because I was reading a blog post and I had the thought. Which means just the week in review. Week in review, what I played, and also finding out how, let's see, here we go. Board Game Stats. BG Stats is the app I use, for those wondering. I use BG Stats to cover what I played, and oh boy did I play a lot this past week. A lot of games. Part of that's because I started playing Terraforming Mars online, and yes, I am logging those plays. I'll explain I've explained it before, but wait a second. So, Monsterpocalypse, Too Many Bones, Undertow. So those are the first, sorry, just random, just spitting off. Starting off last week, I played Monsterpocalypse, I played Too Many Bones, Undertow. We have the Elder Scrolls. I've been playing that for a bunch. I got in a whole bunch of games of that. Technically, it's, depending how you count it, it's either one long session. The way I tend to count my plays is if I sat down for a session, I don't care if that session was 15 minutes or 3 hours, I log it as a play. My logic, for that context, is if I'm going to log a 7-minute game as a play, why should the amount of time be a factor? So to me, I just count sessions. And if I'm logging a game as a play, then a single game of 7th continent for 7 hours might be one play. So I just count and log my plays based on session time. Granted, if I, go and play something for 5 minutes, then go to the bathroom and come back, that's not 2 games. But if I'm playing something for half an hour and then I come back later that day and play for another half hour, to me, that's 2 sessions. For the most part, that's not actually that relevant to my stats and numbers. It's occasionally relevant. It's relevant to what game we're talking about. It's relevant to the Elder Scrolls Skyrim, and it's relevant to another game we'll be talking about this week. But Elder Scrolls, so I played roughly 2.5 hours or so of that game across like 4 or 5 different sessions, maybe 3 or 4 sessions, whatever it was. We have Terraforming Mars. That's got a game. That's a physical game of Terraforming Mars in, which reminded me how much I love Terraforming Mars because I love Terraforming Mars, and that inspired me to finally play my Steam copy of Terraforming Mars. We have the Elder Scrolls Skyrim. The Elder Scrolls Skyrim, 2 sessions that day on Friday. We have Resurgence. Resurgence from Stan Kodowski. We'll have a review of that later We'll have a review up later today. This sentence structure, there's all off. We have Paris la Cité de la Mur. I don't know how to pronounce that. Paris, the City of Lights. A little 2-player game, polyomino game from Devere. I enjoyed it. I don't know if I enjoyed it. My problem is polyomino games are a tightly contested territory. I'll probably want to give it another play to see if it grows on me more. For right now, it's a solid game. Totally recommend it, but also not one that I am... As of right now, I don't think I'm keeping it. Really solid. A little unique. Just, I have a lot of polyomino games and it didn't stand out. Endangered. We have Endangered. That's going to be from Grand Gamers Guild. Got in a play of that. I need more plays of it before I talk about my opinion. I also have the expansion. I have all the stuff. We have Trinity of Rain. Trinity of Rain is so good. So I had a review go up. We'll talk about the review. We'll talk about it in the details. We have My City, and My City. Got 3 more plays into My City, which means I have 4 more plays till I finish that. 1 more session with this couple we're playing with. So 1 more session and I'll finally be done with My City from Reina Knizia. We have Magic Maze on Mars. I've been slowly going through this from sit-down games. I love the original Magic Maze. Then I played through it and got rid of it. And now I'm trying Magic Maze on Mars, which I can't tell if it's better. I think I'd recommend Magic Maze first, but I'm enjoying Magic Maze on Mars more. It's meaty and tight and crunchy. I think actually Tom Vassell just put this in his top 200. This is in his, his five more great games. This was in the last video of that series, so solid game. We have, what's it called? Rolling Heights. I talked about this one already. Rolling Heights is excellent. I will be talking about it more when it gets close to the Kickstarter. We have Magic Maze on Mars, Magic Maze on Mars, Magic Maze on Mars, Magic Maze on Mars. I've been going through this with my daughter. We have The Order of the Vampire Hunters, a few plays of that. That's actually still underneath this table over here. This, by the way, this table is from Bandpass Game Design, link in the description down below. New table, I've been using it for filming. I've also been using it so that I can go through campaign games more easily. I can pick up this surface rises. If I didn't have games on it, I'd show you right now. And then I have a game underneath it, and then I can put this back on, film, and go back and forth between that. I've been slowly going through The Order of the Vampire Hunters all week. That's going to be launching on November 9th, I believe, assuming they don't push it off. We have Terraforming Mars, Terraforming Mars. These are solo plays. So Terraforming Mars, I'm not going to cover them all. I have like 15 plays of Terraforming Mars this past week, all playing it on Steam. Those ones I do count. My logic for counting games are if I'm doing it like an app where I'm like sitting in line and I'm just trying to waste time, I don't count it. But if I'm sitting down dedicatedly with intent to play a game because I want to spend time playing a game, then I do count electronic plays. We have more Magic Maze on Mars, more Magic Maze on Mars. There's like a few games this week that I have like 6 or 7 plays of. Just like a few. I have Magic Maze on Mars, I have Terraforming Mars, I have Order of the Vampire Hunters, a bunch of games. We have another play of Resurgence, another play of Order of the Vampire Hunters, more Terraforming Mars, more Resurgence, Decrypto. Got in 3 or 4 plays of Decrypto. That's a fun little party game. I finally taught my wife that one. Great little party game. Really enjoy it. I still like Codenames more, but Decrypto is very, very solid. Which brings us, what is this? That's just an email. Which brings us to the week in review. The various videos we put up this week. Timestamp for every little section of that, as always. Starting with Saturday. Saturday, I put up a review for Megapulse. Megapulse is a racing game that I gave it a 4 to 5. I'm still, rating games something I'm still messing with. We'll talk about that at the end of the video. But basically, Megapulse, there we are. Megapulse is a game that it's another racing game along with Tiny Turbo Cars and Death Rose All-Stars. And like those two, it falls in the category of a game that I really enjoyed. I also don't know how often they'll get played. Racing games in my collection have not historically done well. I like Megapulse. I like all those 3 games. I don't want any of them to leave, but they do have to get played to stay in my collection. Megapulse is an upcoming Kickstarter, by the way. Then we have, later Saturday, we had Mythic Mischief solo play. I did a solo playthrough of Mythic Mischief. Really solid solo game. It's not one I go to as a solo game, meaning my go-to preference for Mythic Mischief is still 2-player head-to-head, but as far as a solo experience, it was a lot of fun. I could totally recommend it to solo players, and it's one that I imagine I'll actually dive into myself again. What I particularly want, and it's something I told them as well, I want them to have solo enemy powers. I want to be able to like win against each faction. I don't know if it'll happen. Maybe not on this Kickstarter. Maybe not on this Gamefound. Maybe in the next one. We'll see. But I would love to have this enemy AI powers to make it feel a little more like I'm defeating a particular faction instead of just random. On Sunday had a first impressions video of Elder Scrolls First Impressions. I really enjoy Elder Scrolls. It's a solid game. My biggest complaints were the art, the graphic design, and then as well the fact that combat, it's a lot of dice rolling, a lot of whatever. I don't mind it that much because it's fail forward, but it's not the most satisfying combat mechanic I've had. That said, the way I title my review is just one more turn, and I meant it because I really just wanted to keep playing the game. I mentioned already I had to break it up into multiple sessions, and every single time I was like, no, I'll go to work in 2 minutes. I'll go to work in 2 minutes, and I was late to work. But it really has that aspect of taking one more turn. I am eager to dive back into it. I did get a few recommendations in the comments saying, hey, I'll just play Sleeping Gods, and I was like, I should try Sleeping Gods. If Sleeping Gods gives me the same experience with better art, I'm all for it. I just haven't played Sleeping Gods, and I really enjoyed Skyrim so far. Then we have Skyrim is a game I'll be adding to my collection, by the way, no question. I really enjoyed it. I don't know, the balance of what actually gets played is something I'm still working with, but I really enjoyed Skyrim. Then Sunday, that's not true. Sunday that was Sunday. Monday was to back or not to back. One of the more expensive weeks I've had in a while. A lot of games I liked in that video, from Skulls of Sedlic to Resident Evil to Marvel, a bunch of games, King Hill. There's a ton of games in that video that I have tried and liked. Hanamakoji, and that's my weak point, by the way. In general, my weak spot is if I've played the game, I have a harder time saying no to it. If I haven't played the game, I'm usually better at saying, you know what, I have too many games I'm backing, I gotta drop that one. I've done that multiple times. This past few weeks, the past months, I've dropped multiple campaigns that I was totally interested in getting my hands on because I haven't played them and I have to make hard decisions about where my time goes. But if I've played the game, it's so much harder. And all these games I've played this past week, so it was an expensive to back or not to back for me. We have Tuesday. Tuesday was a Monsterpocalypse review. Monsterpocalypse is a game that the way, I mean, I didn't rate it because I'm still messing with ratings. We'll talk about that at the end of the video again. But basically, Monsterpocalypse is a game. It probably would have been a 3 or 5, but I can see it growing to a 4 to 5 depending on what actually happens in the content. The way I put it is I enjoyed my experience with it, I enjoyed my time with it, but I need more. I need more factions on the table at the same time. I need more monsters on the table at the same time. I only got to experience a 2-player head-to-head with 2 specific factions. I want more content, more game modes, more stuff, because the aspect of throwing another monster into a building, ton of fun. The variability of the experience past that was limited, at least based on our plays. So I need more stuff to see how that escalates. I think it could grow to a 4 to 5. For right now, the direct comparison I have is Super Fantasy Brawl from Mythic Games as well. Right now, I'd easily take Super Fantasy Brawl, but depending on how more plays go with Monsterpocalypse, that one might grow. And I hope it does, because I'm biased. The miniatures look amazing. I want those miniatures on my table. I want that toy feeling. I just want the game to be as equally rewarding. Again, enjoyable, but it's that game time aspect. So I needed to hit that 4 if it stays in my collection long term. For right now, I am backing it because I think it will. Based on what I saw, I think it will hit that aspect. Then we had on Tuesday, we had a few videos. That's not true, I just talked about this. Monsterpocalypse on Tuesday. Then we have Trinity of Rain. Trinity of Rain is a really solid game. It's not currently funding on Kickstarter, unfortunately, but it is, I hope it funds, I hope it does well. I really, really enjoyed it. I have complaints about the artwork, again, same issue as Skyrim, but the game itself really surprised me. I expected it to be a decent area control game that I could say nice things about, and it was actually a really good area control game that I'm sad that it's not funding, and I hope it does work out. I assume they'll cancel on relaunch. Hope it works out for them. Then lastly, on Tuesday, we had Too Many Bones solo play. Fortunately, I made far fewer mistakes than I actually thought I would. It's one of those things, playing on camera, you always make more mistakes, or your mistakes are being caught. But it's really both, because I don't check the rulebook. Generally, when I'm playing in person, I'll check the rulebook a few times, do what I need to do. When I'm playing on camera, I just confidently move forward, and I'm like, someone will say I'm doing something wrong. And also, small quirks that don't matter. So, for instance, I placed defense dice on my gear locks when you're really supposed to place them in your active slots. Now, as long as you don't have too many active dice, that doesn't actually matter, and it's easier to track what's going on. But it can matter, especially if you have more active gear locks. So, small little mistakes. I don't think anything really affected the gameplay, not strongly. There was one where apparently the keyword hardy, I've been playing it wrong my entire life. I've been playing hardy as you take 1 damage per attack, per instance of damage, whatever it is. Really, hardy is you take 1 damage per turn, which is brutal. I've been playing hardy wrong my entire Too Many Bones life, so that's fun there. But Too Many Bones, again, it's an excellent experience. I narrowly escaped by the edge of my seat, or whatever it is, my seat of my pants. But again, I slightly cheated, so it depends how you count that. Then we had on Wednesday 10 games I thought would never leave the collection. Basically, it's a look back through memory lane of a whole bunch of games that I thought would never leave, and sadly they did. And some of them I still want back. I don't want to get them back though, because it's one of those things where sometimes I will actually get a game back and then we discover why I loved it and play it more. More often than not, I'm reminded of the fact that there's a reason I got rid of it, and nostalgia is not enough to make me play it again. Then later on Wednesday, we had a Monsterpocalypse Should You Back It. It's been a busy week. We've been trying to cram in too many videos. That's a regular occurrence right now. Just too much stuff I want to do videos on. Even now, I have like 15 videos lined up, reviews for different games that I just haven't put out because I don't have a free day. And retail games are the worst, by the way. Retail games suffer from this all the time because Kickstarters have dates, so I always prioritize those. I have multiple retail reviews that have been sitting in my channel for like 4 weeks, and I just haven't put them out yet. I'll get them eventually. But either way, Monsterpocalypse Should You Back It, going through that. General high notes, Mythic games, those are always worth backing. Even though they have them available, still a decent back as far as if you want the content. Then on Thursday I had that sponsor video, talking about the sponsor, the nature of trying to make the move to full-time. I've talked about this stuff before here and there. I think this is the first time I did like a full-on dedicated video. I don't know when I make the move to full-time. For me, it's when I can reasonably do so without being irresponsible in my life choices. That's when I'll make the move to full-time. Every little bit helps. The sponsorship adds. It's not actually that much money, at least not right now, but it adds. If I can get that extra, 15% over the finish line, the sponsorship definitely does help. So despite the fact that I don't love doing it, I don't love saying in front of the camera, and too many bones, I don't love feeling like I'm selling something as opposed to just saying stuff, even though I believe in those things I'm talking about. But I'm willing to do it as long as it doesn't compromise the general aspect of the content. But again, that's a full dedicated video. Basically, my high notes there was I was very appreciative in the video because the amount of pushback I got from people was very little, and the amount of support I got was a decent amount. So I'm very grateful for that. So Thank you to all of you. But that's basically that. That was Thursday. And then later Thursday, I had Skyrim Should You Back It. Again, I'm trying to cram in these multiple video days. I'm sorry. I don't like doing that. I like having the dedicated time for a video, but sometimes I just have too much stuff that I want to cover. And then on Friday we have games leaving my collection. Different games that are leaving my collection this week, this month or whatever it is. There's always some hard choices to be made. Again, made some hard choices. Again, I need to do a full dedicated video on this. I'm basically picking like 10 games that I haven't tabled in a long time and that I need to table. And I'll be putting them into a video with basically if these don't get played by X date, they're gone. I'm going to be setting a clock on myself. Sometimes you just got to make it happen. That Kickstarter aspect, Kickstarter videos get prioritized because they have a date. So maybe if I assign a date to some of my games, I'll actually play them and see if they're games I need to keep or not. And then lastly, today we have 2 videos going up. We have a video going up at 1 Eastern Standard Time for Hegemony. Hegemony is one of those games, well, you can watch the review. We have solid games. I'm not like hedging. I realize I don't want to get into it now. And then we have Resurgence. Again, another solid game. Fantastic design by Stan Kudensky, going up at 4 Eastern Standard Time. Those are 2 Kickstarters that are both going up next week. I believe Resurgence is on the 10th, and I believe Hegemony is on the 9th, if I'm not mistaken. I might be mistaken, but I believe. We'll find out either way. And then next week I have a few videos as usual, whole bunch of stuff. I'm going to have a video of what we backed in October, so we'll have that video that I do with Rena as usual. And then going back to the part that I said a few times in this video, we'll talk about at the end, I will have a video on helping me review games better. You may have noticed that over the past week, a lot of my review format has changed, has shifted. The structure I have, whether I have a rating or not, different things have been adjusted in my review format. I will be putting out a full video talking about the thought. It's more of an experiment. It's not that it's guaranteed to stay that way. Right now, it's just an experiment. I will be talking about the different aspects of a review format that I had before, that I have now, that I might potentially add, and basically asking for your feedback as to what works best for you. Because ultimately, I will not offer something on the table that doesn't work for me. So I still have to do things that work for me. But there are things that might work better for you, and if I can find that line of what feels natural to me, what I enjoy doing, and what doesn't feel wrong, but you also prefer, then I'm absolutely giving you that choice. So that's going to be part of the conversation. It's going to be a Google form, all this stuff. If you care, vote. If you don't care, don't vote. It's all the same there. Then lastly, games on the table. Games on the table, we have a few over here. We have Magic Maze on Mars, which I've been playing through already. I'm already like 6-7 games in. I want to go through this and finish this with Ricky. We have Bitoku and Anno 1800, which I sadly have not gotten either of these to the table yet. To be fair, I played Anno 1800 a while ago on TTS, but I haven't played the physical copies of either of these. I've read the rulebooks for both of these. They just have not been prioritized by my gaming group. That's their fault, not mine. I'm going to try to make it happen. Then we have Paper Dungeons. Paper Dungeons is from Alley Cat Games. This one is basically a roll and write adventure through a dungeon. Looks really cool. Halfway through the rules. Hope to play this with Rena. And then we have Endogenesis, which I don't know all that much about. Yeah, it's like a superhero-ish style fighting card deck building game. Art looks gorgeous. Game looks fun. Game seems well rated. I hope to dive into that. This is the 2nd edition. They actually have an upcoming Kickstarter for, I believe, a game called Mercurial as well. But I hope to dive into this one, perhaps solo, perhaps not. We'll see. In any case, until next time, I am Alex Radcliffe from Board Game Co. Thank you for being here. And, well, thank you so much for being here. Have a great week. And as always, have a good one.